Zimbabweans are heading home for the holiday season after working and saving up to take much needed essentials to their families. And this time they may be having to take more provisions as their country faces a crippling economic crisis. Frequent power cuts, food and fuel shortages and soaring inflation are making it hard to be festive. For more on this, then, I'm joined by international economic relations law expert Brian Kagoro. Brian, thank you so much for coming through. So we've got a report, we've got one of our reporters out to Beitbridge, which, you know, is a tradition in newsrooms. Ngobile Madlala reporting to us that actually it's not as busy as you people in Joburg assume it would be. And that, for me, was a story on its own, because we all know the trend around this time. The flow of people trying to get to Zimbabwe is really high. What are we to read in what Ngobile is reporting in as far as the traffic at the Beitbridge border post?
Well, there are several factors. I think, as you know, that most might have opted to send goods or groceries than to brave the many hours long wait at the border, waiting to cross. Or some may have opted to travel on days that are traditionally less busy, like Christmas Day or New Year's. I think when you put this in context, you have to remember what the challenge is. The challenge is what you have mentioned, but also when we move from a multi-currency, what the government did as a shock to reintroduce the local currency without that transition period, is that it became, in terms of the rand, the pula, the currencies that were circulating, most Zimbabweans who were going home for the festive season were carrying their rand, their pula, and therefore were buying from the local market. And at the time, the price differentials between what you bought the goods for in Zimbabwe and in South Africa was about 10–15%, which, if you added duty, was manageable. When we remove the multi-currency regime, it essentially means that the producers back home, the local entrepreneurs, cannot legally accept rand or dollar. So I understand there were problems with the dollar and the money laundering, but I think that we were a bit rushed in removing the pula and the rand, given the size of the population that works in this, in the rand and the pula economy.
Comparatively speaking, Brian, where are we in as far as this crisis is concerned, if you compare with where we've been previously? And I think for many the benchmark has always been 2008, but recently, earlier on in the year, we heard the World Food Programme saying that they are stepping up their intervention in Zimbabwe. You and I are talking about people sending groceries home. There's always been those remittances, you know, people sending monies and other things back home. But where are we in terms of the crisis?
I think we've painted ourselves into a corner. And this is a friend shared with me a quotation from Franklin D. Roosevelt that says, the country requires urgent or bold action and constant experimentation, that if you make a mistake in terms of economic policy, you have to try something else. We tried this, the current policy. It's not working because what it has done is just crippled the local entrepreneur because of the high cost of production. It's limiting productivity, it's limiting production, and also because of the things that you talked about, the power cuts and stuff. But it has also made it impossible for those that remit to remit cash to their loved ones, because even if their loved ones receive the rand, it's not legal tender in terms of their ability to go to a shop and buy with it. So in essence, I think what needs to happen is we need to climb down from that position, reintroduce maybe some form of multi-currency convertibility of the rand and the pula in particular, number one. But number two, we have a humanitarian crisis. Sometimes nature conspires against you when you are in this situation. So the drought situation and poor planning on our part has meant that we have over 7.5 million people who are facing hunger and starvation. And given the magnitude of that crisis and given the shortages that you painted, I think that it's a worse off situation in the sense that in 2008, we looked forward to some form of resolution and relief. We're at a point where I think that positions are hardening in terms of the government is persuaded that the cost that it has chosen is the best. The opposition is unwilling to negotiate on certain things. The economy, on the other hand, which is the biggest opposition in the country, is unrelenting.
You actually take it in the direction I want to end, Brian. We saw recently former President Thabo Mbeki, again back in Zimbabwe, meeting with some of the country's key leaders. Is it time now for another take at this intervention? I mean, we hear a lot from SADC and other countries about the need to lift sanctions, but are we at the point where actually time could be ripe for a take two of the negotiated settlement, trying to find consensus between the parties, because perhaps breaking that political logjam, a word that Nelson Chamisa likes, would perhaps help ease the economic troubles?
I think the biggest solution is the government itself and governance. I think without anybody else coming to the party, the government implementing reforms envisaged by the 2013 Constitution, not the direction that we're seeing with the muted constitutional amendments. That would send confidence vibes to the international community and everybody else. The second is consensus within the political circles. I think that negotiating with or discussing with the MDC, let's be mindful, we are not in the same situation as 2008, where the opposition had won an election and the de facto government, which was ZANU-PF, had lost the election. We have ZANU-PF, which says it won the election, although it's disputed by the MDC, which is having difficulties steering the country in the direction it wishes to go. So this is a unique situation where the negotiation is about how to build national consensus so that Zimbabweans can collectively speak to the international community, but also to build confidence within the domestic community collectively. And I don't think that it can be done without SADC and the AU, and I do not think that it can be imposed on the Zimbabweans. So President Mbeki may visit Zimbabweans, meet the political actors. If there's no confidence in him as a mediator or him as a goodwill ambassador, and if there's no buy-in from the leadership of SADC, if the leadership of SADC is seen as siding with one party to the Zimbabwean conflict, we're going to have this thing trudge on to 2023. So we do need leadership from SADC and leadership from the African Union. Yeah.
All right. Brian, thank you so much for coming through. Brian Kagoro coming through and having the conversation with me about the situation in Zimbabwe as many Zimbabweans make their way to Zimbabwe for the holidays.